She walked into the bank beaming with pride, only to leave humiliated and on the verge of tears. Leah Monroe, a young woman with Down syndrome, followed every rule, but the staff treated her like she didn't belong. What they didn't know? A silent witness was watching, and when he stood up, the entire bank froze. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The tiny apartment smelled like cinnamon and warm bread. Leah Monroe loved that smell. It reminded her of Saturday mornings in the bakery, the ones where she got to roll dough and sprinkle sugar with perfect, focused joy. She had been working there for over a year now, 14 months and 6 days to be exact. Her job was simple but important. She packed croissants, wiped glass counters, and remembered the names of customers others forgot. At 27 years old, Leah took great pride in her work. Every dollar she earned felt like proof that she could stand on her own, that she wasn't just someone with Down syndrome, that she was capable, independent, resilient. Each night after her shift, she'd come home and empty the change from her pocket into one of the 6 mason jars lined up on the windowsill. Each one had a label written in purple marker: rent, groceries, church donation, emergencies, dreams. And the newest jar, placed right in the middle, bank account. For over a year she had been saving carefully, tips, coins, dollar bills slipped in by kind customers, and even birthday money from her aunt in Ohio. She recorded every deposit in her notebook, the one covered in stickers of sunflowers and kittens. She called it her dream binder. It held notes about budgeting, drawings of banks, and a detailed list of what she needed to bring to open her very first savings account. This wasn't just a routine errand to her. This was a personal declaration. She wanted to walk into that bank and open an account by herself, with no guardian, no explanation, and no apology. She had studied how to do it, practiced what she would say, and checked every requirement twice, then 3 times. Her grandmother Marge sat at the small dining table sipping tea and watching Leah fold her favorite cardigan. Marge had raised her since she was 3, through every doctor visit, every school meeting, and every moment of self-doubt. Marge had stood beside her. But today was different. Today, Leah insisted on doing this on her own. "You've done all the work, sweetheart," Marge said softly. "Just remember, the world can be unfair sometimes. People may not always see you clearly, but that's their mistake, not yours." Leah didn't look up. She was too focused on smoothing the sleeves just right and placing her folder inside her tote bag. "I know, Grandma. But I'm ready," she whispered, almost like a promise to herself. Then, louder and more certain, she repeated, "I am capable. I belong. I am ready." Marge smiled, though her eyes betrayed the worry only a guardian can feel. She reached across the table and squeezed Leah's hand. "You've always been ready. Go show them." The sun peeked through the curtains as Leah stood in front of the mirror. She had chosen her favorite outfit for this big day: a soft yellow blouse with buttons shaped like daisies, and a navy skirt that swayed when she walked. Her grandmother had helped iron it the night before. She wore her small silver necklace, the one her mother had given her long ago, with a tiny heart pendant that read, "You are loved." She practiced her lines again. "Good morning. I would like to open a savings account, please. I have all the required documents with me." She smiled at her reflection, nodded, and began again. "Good morning. I would like to open a savings account, please." The same line 5 more times. Each repetition made her feel stronger. Her dream binder rested on the kitchen counter. Inside were all the documents she had meticulously prepared: her ID, a utility bill with her name, her social security number, and a typed cover letter she had written on her own. It read, "Dear Bank Manager, I would like to open a personal savings account. I have saved my money carefully. I can manage it responsibly. Thank you for helping me." Her handwriting was careful, each word written with intention. She had asked her co-worker, Nina, to proofread it. Nina said it was perfect and hugged her afterward. Sea light. Leah slid her feet into her polished flats, tucked her hair behind her ears, and gave herself one last look in the mirror. She smiled again, though this one trembled slightly. She took a deep breath, picked up her tote bag, and turned toward the door. Marge met her there. She didn't say much, just pulled her granddaughter into a tight hug, kissed her on the forehead, and said, "Call me when you're done, okay?" Leah nodded. "I will." Then she stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, the city slowly coming alive. The bakery on the corner had just opened, and Leah could smell the cinnamon rolls from a block away. She walked past it, head held high, heart thudding in her chest like a drum. She passed a man sweeping his porch, a mother carrying her toddler, and a cyclist who nodded at her kindly. Leah smiled at everyone. Her joy wasn't just in her goal, it was in the journey. She arrived at the bank just before 9:00 a.m., 10 minutes early. The tall glass doors reflected her image back at her. She reached out and placed one hand on the handle. Her mantra came again, soft but certain. "You are capable, you belong, you are ready." Then she stepped inside. The lobby was already filling with people. Professionals in suits checking their watches, parents with restless toddlers, elderly clients balancing walkers. The sound of printers, keyboards, and murmured frustrations echoed beneath the low hum of elevator music. Leah paused just inside the entrance, letting her eyes adjust to the bright fluorescent lights. She clutched her tote bag tighter. To the left, a woman at the welcome desk was directing people to different lines. Leah joined the one marked New Accounts. The line was long, curling past a row of potted plants and across a display of brochures that read, "Invest in your future." She smiled nervously at a young woman behind her, who glanced down at Leah's dream binder and then looked away without smiling back. That was okay, Leah told herself. She didn't need anyone's approval today. She had done everything right. She opened the binder once more and carefully reviewed each page while waiting. Her checklist was complete: government ID, proof of address, social security card, and the printed form she had filled out in advance. Everything had been double-checked. She had even practiced her signature 5 times the night before to make sure it looked neat. Minutes ticked by. The teller line moved slowly. Leah used the wait to rehearse her lines again, this time under her breath. She felt her palms getting a little sweaty, but reminded herself that nervousness wasn't failure. It just meant she cared. She thought about all the times people assumed she couldn't handle things. Teachers who talked over her, strangers who asked her grandmother questions instead of her, doctors who ignored her opinions. She was used to being underestimated. But not today. Today she was going to prove something, not just to the world, but to herself. Her eyes flicked up to the teller windows. Some of the staff looked rushed and tired, talking quickly to customers and pushing through transactions. But one of the tellers, a woman with dark hair and an impatient expression, caught her attention. The woman glanced toward the line, then looked back at her screen. Leah didn't know it yet, but that woman's name was Amanda. And Amanda would be the one to decide whether today was everything Leah hoped for, or something she would never forget, for all the wrong reasons. A light dinged. The next customer stepped away. It was Leah's turn. She took one last deep breath. Then, holding her binder like it was made of gold, she stepped forward toward the counter. Leah stepped up to the teller counter, holding her binder tightly against her chest. Her smile was warm, her shoulders square. She had practiced this moment for months. The woman behind the counter looked up briefly, clearly distracted, her fingers still tapping something into her computer. "Yes?" the teller asked flatly, not even meeting Leah's eyes. "Hi," Leah said, offering a careful smile. "My name is Leah Monroe. I'd like to open a savings account, please." Amanda, the teller, glanced at the binder. She gave a curt nod and motioned for Leah to hand it over. Leah placed the documents gently on the counter, standing patiently with her hands folded in front of her. Amanda opened the binder and started flipping through the pages quickly. The line behind Leah was growing. Someone sighed loudly. A baby cried nearby. A man muttered something about wasting a lunch break. The room buzzed with frustration, the sort that spreads quickly in crowded places. Amanda's eyes scanned the documents with visible irritation, her brow furrowing. "You filled this out wrong," Amanda said abruptly, pushing the form forward. "Here, and here. This isn't acceptable." Leah blinked. I followed the guide. I used the bank's instructions," she said quietly. "I double-checked everything." Amanda scoffed. "Well, then you still managed to mess it up." The words hit Leah like a slap, but she didn't let go of her composure. "I can fix it," she offered gently. "I brought extra forms. I can fill it again if you want." Amanda let out a long sigh, then leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Look, it's not just the forms. You're going to need a guardian or someone to help you with this. These accounts are a lot more complicated than you think." Leah tilted her head slightly, confused. "I don't have a guardian," she said. "I'm my own guardian. I live independently. I work. I saved this money myself." Amanda raised her eyebrows with exaggerated surprise. "Sure you are." The sarcasm in her voice was sharp. It stung. Someone behind Leah snorted quietly. Another customer glanced over, took one look at the interaction, then turned back around, shaking their head. The embarrassment began to settle over Leah like a heavy coat. Still, she held her ground. "I brought everything you asked for," she said. "My ID, my proof of address, my social security card, they're all there. I even wrote a letter." Amanda flipped back to the cover letter and read the first few lines, then set it aside without a word. Leah's voice quivered slightly but remained steady. "I've been saving for this for 14 months. Amanda raised her voice just enough to carry. "We don't have time for this today." A few people turned their heads. Leah could feel them staring. Leah's fingers gripped the edge of the counter. Her heart was thudding in her chest, louder than the murmurs around her. She tried to stay calm. She had been through harder things than this. She reminded herself of what her grandmother had said that morning. But Amanda's tone was like cold water thrown across her hope. "I just want to open an account," Leah said again, more quietly this time. "Please." Amanda leaned forward slightly, still keeping her voice loud enough for others to hear. "Look, sweetheart, this process takes time. We can't hold up the line if someone isn't ready. Why don't you come back another day, with someone who can walk you through it?" Leah swallowed hard. "I prepared for this, I really did." Amanda rolled her eyes. "We've got a lot of customers waiting, maybe next time." That sentence, "maybe next time," felt like the door slamming shut. Leah's face flushed, her ears burning. Around her, the noise in the room had shifted. People weren't just annoyed anymore, they were entertained. She caught sight of a young man nudging the woman beside him and whispering. Another woman looked on with a mix of pity and amusement, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Amanda began gathering Leah's documents into a sloppy pile. "Here, take these. You can fix them at home." Leah reached out to stop her. "But these are right. I followed all the steps. I practiced. I studied. Please, just tell me what's wrong so I can fix it here." Amanda didn't respond. She just set the folder down and turned toward her computer, clicking something, with a sigh of exaggerated frustration. Then she glanced at the customer behind Leah and motioned them forward. The man stepped up awkwardly, unsure whether to wait or move. "I'm not done," Leah said firmly, turning to face Amanda again. Her voice cracked, but the words came from somewhere deeper. Amanda glanced up at her with a blank expression. "Yes, you are." More eyes turned now. The tension in the room was thick, but no one said anything. No one stepped forward. The customers simply watched. Leah turned to look at the room, at the quiet stairs, the people pretending not to listen. She felt a strange sensation, like shrinking into herself. But somewhere deep beneath the embarrassment, something else stirred. Something stronger than shame. She looked back at Amanda. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "You didn't even try." Amanda didn't respond. The silence stretched. Leah took her documents back slowly, the papers now slightly crumpled from the dismissive handling. She stepped away from the counter, but she didn't walk out. She walked to the side and sat in a small chair next to the brochure rack. Then she opened her binder again, smoothed the pages, and began to quietly go through each one. She read every line again, tracing her finger across the checkboxes she had already confirmed the night before. Her ID was there. Her address was clearly listed. Her social security number was correct. The letter was folded perfectly. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. So why did it feel like she had done something wrong? Across the lobby, Amanda continued helping the next customer like nothing had happened. The line moved forward. The voices around her returned to their steady rhythm of impatience, keyboard clicks, and half-heard conversations. But inside Leah, the rhythm had broken. She kept whispering to herself, almost like a quiet chant. "I did everything right. I did everything right." Her fingers trembled slightly, but she held the binder open on her lap and continued reviewing. Maybe if she could just find the mistake. Maybe she could fix it, go back to the counter, and try again. But deep down, she knew there was no mistake. That's what hurt the most. A man seated 2 chairs down from her looked at her, then away quickly. Leah caught the motion and tucked her head down further. She didn't want anyone's pity. She wanted what she came here to do. From the far side of the room, someone let out a quiet laugh. Leah didn't look up, but she heard it. Another voice whispered something behind her. Something that sounded like, "Why'd they even let her come alone?" She blinked hard and pressed her binder against her chest. Her eyes were stinging now. She had been so proud walking in. She had imagined herself smiling at the teller, shaking hands, maybe even getting a little congratulations. She had imagined calling her grandma after and saying, "I did it all by myself." Now she wasn't sure what to say at all. The minutes crawled by, the weight of everything pressed on her shoulders. She could feel her confidence leaking out, 1 second at a time. Her hands moved slower now, her shoulders slightly hunched. And still, no one came to help. Amanda didn't look in her direction again. The manager hadn't appeared. The customers who had watched the interaction simply moved on with their day. It was as if the moment had never happened. But Leah couldn't move on. She sat there, determined not to cry, determined to understand what had just happened, determined to keep believing that she could do this, even if no one else believed it with her. Somewhere in that room, someone was watching, someone who had seen the whole thing unfold. But Leah didn't know that yet. All she knew was that she had come with everything they asked for, and somehow it still wasn't enough. Leah sat quietly in the corner, her binder clutched to her chest like it could somehow protect her from the weight of what had just happened. Her face was warm, her cheeks flushed. She could still hear Amanda's voice echoing in her ears. The dismissiveness, the impatience, the words that stung more than she ever expected. "We don't have time for this today," as if she didn't belong. She kept her head low, avoiding the curious glances still drifting her way. Every minute felt like an hour. Then, from the side hallway, a man in a navy suit began walking toward her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a practiced smile that barely touched his eyes. A shiny name tag on his chest read Dennis Granger, Assistant Branch Manager. "Miss Monroe?" he said, pausing in front of her. Leah looked up slowly. "Yes?" "I'm Dennis, one of the managers here. I understand there was a bit of confusion at the counter. Why don't you come with me? We'll talk through everything in private." His voice was warm on the surface, but something about it felt rehearsed, like a waiter delivering a line he'd used one too many times. Leah hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to move from her seat, but she also didn't want to make a scene, so she nodded and stood. He led her to a small glass-walled booth near the side offices. The room was quiet, removed from the crowd, but not private enough to be safe from the occasional glance of passing employees. Dennis gestured for her to sit at the round table in the center. Leah placed her tote bag in her lap and opened her binder again. "I just want to open a savings account," she began, her voice small but steady. "I brought everything. I followed the checklist from your website. I even wrote a letter." Dennis nodded slowly, folding his hands in front of him like a man preparing for a lecture. "I understand, and I can see that you've put in a lot of effort, but sometimes effort isn't enough when there are certain requirements." "What requirements didn't I meet?" Leah asked. Dennis offered a smile that was meant to be kind, but the tilt of his head felt more like pity. "Let me ask you something first, Leah. Are you sure you're ready for this kind of responsibility? A bank account comes with a lot of things to manage: fees, transactions, balances. It can be overwhelming." Leah frowned slightly. "I've been saving money for over a year. I keep track of every dollar in a notebook. I make deposits at the grocery store ATM. I pay rent, I help with groceries. I'm ready." Dennis leaned back and crossed his legs. "But that's not the same as managing a formal account. And honestly, most people in your situation usually have a co-signer, a support person." Leah blinked slowly. "Support person?" she repeated, confused. Dennis nodded, as if explaining something to a child. "Yes, someone who can help oversee the account, make sure you don't make mistakes. It's not about denying you the opportunity. It's about making sure you're protected." Leah sat up straighter. Her hands were starting to tremble again, but she fought to keep her voice even. "I don't need someone to sign for me. I can do this by myself. I already do everything on my own." Dennis raised an eyebrow, then picked up her binder and slowly flipped through a few pages. He didn't read them, he just glanced. Then he set it back down and exhaled. "We've just found," he said carefully, "that in many cases, people in your circumstances end up needing help. There are legal complexities involved, guardianship laws. It's not as simple as filling out a form and handing over some documents." "I'm not under guardianship," Leah said, her voice gaining strength now. "I'm legally independent. I brought everything. I even brought my ID, proof of address, and wrote a letter." Dennis offered another one of his polished smiles. "Technically, yes, you've done that. But sometimes we have to look beyond the paperwork. This institution has a responsibility to ensure its customers are fully informed and capable of managing their accounts." Leah stared at him. "I am informed. I am capable." He didn't answer right away. Outside the booth, a couple walked past and glanced inside. The woman gave Leah a lingering look before whispering something to her partner. They both chuckled as they moved on. Leah noticed. She also noticed the man a few feet away, leaning against the wall and glancing down at his phone, then up at her again. He wasn't even pretending not to watch. Dennis leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. "I'm not saying you're not smart. I'm sure you've tried very hard, but these policies are in place for a reason. They're about consistency and safety. Maybe if you come back with your grandmother or someone else." "My grandmother didn't help me with this," Leah cut in. "I planned it. I researched it. I filled it out. I did it." He sighed and rubbed his chin. "You're very determined, but we still have to be careful. A co-signer would make the process smoother for you and for us." Leah's hands were gripping the edge of the table now. "No one else needs to co-sign. I brought what I was told to bring. Why are you changing the rules for me?" Dennis glanced out the glass wall and looked uncomfortable. "We're not changing the rules. We're interpreting them thoughtfully." A man sitting across the waiting area muttered just loud enough, "She probably doesn't even know what she's signing." Leah's eyes darted toward him. Someone else nearby whispered, "This is just sad." She looked down at her lap, heart sinking. Leah tightened her arms around the binder as if it could shield her from the sting of the voices outside the booth. Her throat ached, but she wouldn't cry. Not here, not in front of him, not in front of them. She stared at Dennis, willing herself to stay firm. I followed every step. I read your website. I practiced. I even asked someone to double-check it. What more do I need to do? Dennis looked away, tapping his fingers once on the table, then sighing again. Leah, it's not that you did something wrong. It's just, there are procedures. And we're trying to protect you. I don't need protection, Leah said, her voice breaking but her eyes locked on his. I need respect. The room outside the glass suddenly felt louder. The whispering was no longer subtle. Phones were out. Someone lifted theirs slightly and angled the camera toward her. A faint shutter sound clicked. She heard it. Then she heard the voice beside it. This is pathetic, someone whispered. Leah froze. Her head lowered as she stared at her binder, no longer flipping through pages. Her hands were shaking now. Every part of her body felt heavy and slow, like she was walking through water, struggling to breathe. She whispered to herself. But I did everything right. Dennis leaned back in his chair and didn't respond. He just glanced toward the door, clearly wishing the conversation would end. Leah stood slowly, clutching her binder tightly against her chest, her knuckles pale from how hard she was holding on. I think I'll just wait outside, she mumbled. Dennis stood as well, offering a small nod, almost relieved. Maybe that's best. You can speak with our receptionist on the way out and we'll schedule something for another day. When you're more prepared. Leah didn't answer. She turned, opened the glass door slowly, and stepped out. The moment she entered the lobby again, it felt like everything stopped for a breath. Eyes followed her. Some people looked away immediately, embarrassed. Others didn't. She took a slow step forward, then another, walking past the line, past the woman who had chuckled earlier, past the man who had taken her photo. She could feel their stares on her back. Someone whispered, "That's the girl they wouldn't help." Leah didn't look at anyone. She reached the small waiting bench by the door and sat down again, her hands still trembling, her eyes locked on the binder in her lap. She whispered the words again, not to anyone else, just to herself. I did everything right. But this time, it didn't sound like a statement. It sounded like a question. Toward the far end of the lobby, near a large window that overlooked the street, a man sat quietly in one of the corner chairs. His head was slightly lowered, a faded baseball cap casting a shadow over his face. He wore a charcoal hoodie, loose jeans, and scuffed boots. To anyone passing by, he looked like someone simply waiting for his number to be called. But his eyes were watching everything. He had been there since Leah first stepped up to the counter. He had seen the way Amanda barely looked at her, the way her voice changed. Sharper, less patient. He'd noticed the stiffness in Leah's posture, the careful way she spoke, the repeated line she'd practiced. "I would like to open a savings account, please." And how it was brushed aside as if she were asking for something unreasonable. He'd seen Amanda's smirk. He'd seen the manager, Dennis, walk over with his forced smile and that overly sweet tone that somehow still carried insult underneath. And now he saw Leah, sitting on the bench by the door. Shoulders curled inward, her binder open again on her lap, eyes red and swollen. Her lips were moving slightly, repeating something only she could hear. Her hands trembled as she carefully flipped through each page, as if she were searching for proof that she hadn't imagined it all, that she had in fact done everything right. The man's jaw tightened. Beside him, an elderly woman leaned over and whispered, "Heartbreaking, isn't it? She came here full of pride. You could see it in her face when she walked in." The man nodded slightly, but didn't respond. His eyes didn't leave Leah. He watched as Amanda leaned back in her chair and laughed at something another teller said, still smiling, still carrying on as if nothing had happened. No hint of regret, no acknowledgement of what she'd just done. A few feet away, Dennis was speaking in a hushed voice to another employee. His hand gestured vaguely toward the lobby, and though the words were low, the man in the cap could still make them out. "Just ignore it," Dennis muttered. "She'll leave eventually. It's not worth the hassle." Not worth the hassle. That phrase sat heavy in the air. The man inhaled slowly and let the breath out through his nose. His fists, resting on his knees, clenched until his knuckles turned pale beneath the sleeves of his hoodie. He glanced at the waiting number in his hand. It was still 5 numbers away from being called. But he had already decided he wasn't going to wait. Quietly, deliberately, the man stood up. His movements were slow, but filled with a quiet certainty. He adjusted his cap and began walking toward the front of the bank. Toward Amanda. Toward Dennis. Toward Leah. As the man crossed the lobby, heads turned, not because they recognized him, yet, but because of the energy in his movement. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that made people pause, the kind that made silence spread like a ripple through water. He moved past the line of waiting customers, past the velvet ropes, past the man who had laughed earlier, who now looked up with sudden uncertainty. Amanda was still seated at her station, finishing a transaction with another customer. She didn't notice him at first. Her fingers tapped across her keyboard, her eyes focused on the screen. Then she looked up, and there he was. Standing just a few feet away. "Sir?" she said, startled. "You need to wait your turn." The man slowly reached up and removed his cap. And just like that, the room shifted. Recognition hit like a wave. Whispers spread. Wait, is that Keanu Reeves? No way. That's really him." Amanda's face lost its color. Dennis, still chatting quietly across the lobby, turned and froze mid-sentence. But Keanu didn't acknowledge the murmurs. His eyes remained locked on Amanda. Calm, unblinking. He spoke slowly, clearly. "Can you explain," he asked, "why you're treating this customer that way?" Amanda blinked. I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean." Keanu's gaze didn't move. "That young woman sitting by the door. Her name is Leah. She came here with every document you requested. She followed all your procedures. She waited her turn, and still, you dismissed her." Amanda opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence deepened. Dennis stepped forward quickly, his voice tight with unease. "Mr. Reeves, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. We treat all our customers with respect." Keanu finally turned to Dennis, his tone still level but sharp. "I've been sitting here the whole time. I saw how she was spoken to. I saw the way she was dismissed, and I heard what you just said to your employee. Just ignore it, she'll leave." Dennis flushed. "We didn't mean it like that." Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then how did you mean it?" Amanda looked around, searching for something to anchor her. Her voice, when it came, was defensive. "We were just following protocol. Sometimes certain customers need extra help. We're trying to avoid mistakes." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "And what mistake did she make?" No answer. "She came in prepared. She brought everything you asked for. She waited her turn, she was respectful, and you made her feel like she didn't belong here." Leah, still seated near the entrance, watched everything unfold with wide eyes. Her hand slowly lowered the binder to her lap. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence did the talking, and the entire room was listening. Dennis took a step closer, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Reeves, we appreciate your concern, but I assure you this is being handled professionally. We're simply trying to ensure that all procedures are followed carefully. We have protocols for a reason." Keanu turned to face him fully. "Protocols?" he repeated. "Or prejudice disguised as procedure?" The words hung in the air like thunder. Dennis's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The customers in the lobby were completely still. Some had their phones out now, recording silently. Others simply watched, eyes wide, breath held. Keanu looked back toward Leah. She hadn't moved. Her hands were frozen over the binder. Her eyes were locked on him. Her lips parted just slightly, as if afraid to breathe. When their eyes met, she didn't speak, but she didn't need to. The question in her face was enough. "Why is he doing this for me?" Keanu turned back to Amanda. "You raised your voice at her. You dismissed her without reviewing her documents properly. And now, instead of apologizing, you're trying to justify it." Amanda swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to upset her. I was just trying to do my job." "No," Keanu said calmly. "Doing your job means helping people, not humiliating them." There's no way out of it." A young man in line nodded silently. An older woman behind him whispered, "Good for him." Dennis tried once more. "Mr. Reeves, with all due respect, this is a private customer matter. If we could speak in my office." "This stopped being private the moment you humiliated her in front of everyone," Keanu said. "You don't get to hide it now." His voice didn't rise, but it grew colder, firmer. "I watched her walk in here proud. I watched her prepare. I saw how carefully she handled those documents. And then I watched you tear her apart, piece by piece, because she didn't fit into your idea of what capable looks like." No one dared interrupt him now. Amanda looked like she wanted to disappear. Dennis adjusted his tie but said nothing. Keanu took one step closer to the counter and placed both hands on the edge. His voice softened, but the power in it remained. "People like Leah don't get the luxury of mistakes. They're held to a different standard, judged faster, dismissed sooner. But she still showed up here with more grace than anyone I've seen today." He looked down briefly, then back at them. "You should be learning from her, not pushing her away." Leah slowly stood from the bench. Her legs felt heavy, but something had shifted inside her. She wasn't invisible anymore. The room, once filled with murmurs and judgment, now felt charged with something else. Something beginning to change. Amanda looked over the counter again, her fingers reaching to wave Leah away one final time. Her voice was already forming the words, firm and dismissive. "Ma'am, I told you." Then a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Why is this customer being treated differently?" The entire lobby fell silent. The tapping of keyboards stopped. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the whirring printer behind the teller windows seemed quieter in that instant. Amanda's hand froze in the air. She turned toward the voice, confused, then startled. The man from earlier, the one in the hoodie who had stepped forward, was now standing just a few feet away, his posture calm, his presence unmistakable. "I'm sorry?" Amanda asked, blinking rapidly. The man slowly removed his sunglasses and lowered his hood. Gasps echoed across the room. A young woman near the door whispered, "That's him. That's Keanu Reeves." Another voice followed, "No way. Is that really?" Amanda's face drained of color. She stood a little straighter, suddenly unsure of everything. Her mouth opened, but the words came out jumbled. "Sir, this isn't your concern." Keanu didn't flinch. "Actually," he said, his voice steady, "it concerns everyone in this room." He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the bank. The crowd was still frozen, watching, waiting. Customers in line, staff behind the counters, even Dennis, now hovering near the office hallway, had fallen into stunned silence. Leah hadn't moved. She stood behind Amanda, still holding her binder to her chest. Her eyes were wide, her breath shallow. She looked at Keanu as if unsure whether this was real or a dream her mind had conjured in desperation. He glanced at her, then stepped closer to the counter. With gentle hands, he reached out and lifted the binder from her arms. He held it carefully, as if it were something fragile and precious. Without a word, he opened it and began flipping through the pages. His eyes scanned each form. The printed letter, The identification, the proofs of address, the handwritten notes. He nodded slowly. "Everything looks correct," he said aloud, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Everything is here." Then he looked up again. "So, why the obstruction?" Amanda glanced at Dennis for backup, but he didn't move. Keanu didn't look away. "This isn't complicated," he said. "This customer brought all the documents. She waited in line. She followed your process. So explain to me, why is she being turned away?" Amanda's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Keanu continued, still calm but unwavering. "If it were anyone else, someone in a suit, someone who looked like me, would you have handled it the same way?" No one answered. The weight of the moment hung in the air, heavier than any silence that had come before. Amanda's voice cracked as she finally managed a response. "We're just following procedures, Mr. Reeves. We have certain guidelines for customers who may need additional support." Keanu didn't move. His voice stayed calm. "What about her says she needs support more than anyone else? The way she speaks, the way she looks, or just the assumptions you've made before she even sat down?" Amanda shifted uncomfortably. "Sometimes it's better to have someone present who can help make sure they understand what they're signing." "She came prepared," Keanu said, holding up the folder. "She brought everything you asked for. She wrote a letter, she filled out the forms, she rehearsed her words, and still, she wasn't given the dignity of being treated like every other customer." Leah stood silently beside him, tears brimming in her eyes, but they didn't fall. She looked at Keanu, then back at Amanda, and waited. "It's definitely Leah." Katrina. The crowd in the lobby remained still. Phones were out, cameras rolling, but no one interrupted. Keanu turned slightly to address the room now. "We live in a world where people like Leah have to try 10 times harder just to be seen as equal. And when they finally show up, ready, focused, prepared, they're still turned away." His words echoed across the tile floor. They're told to sit down, to wait, to come back with someone smarter or more capable, even when everything they need is already right here in their hands. Dennis stepped forward now, clearing his throat. "Mr. Reeves, we apologize for any misunderstanding. I assure you, we had no intention of discriminating." "But you did," Keanu interrupted, without raising his voice. "Intent doesn't erase impact." Amanda looked down, visibly shaken. Dennis rubbed the back of his neck. "We were just trying to make sure things went smoothly. This isn't about discrimination, it's about caution." Keanu's brow tightened. "You weren't being cautious, you were being dismissive." He turned back to Leah. "Can I show them what you brought?" She nodded slowly, still too overwhelmed to speak. Keanu lifted the cover page of the binder, displaying the forms and neatly arranged documentation. He didn't rush. He let everyone see the effort, the care, the precision. "She planned this," he said softly. "She didn't stumble in here by accident. She worked for this." Amanda opened her mouth again. "We didn't mean to humiliate her." "But you did," Keanu said again. "And now it's time to ask why." The manager glanced around at the customers watching, at the phones pointed in their direction, and at Amanda, who now looked like she wished she could disappear. In that moment, it wasn't about celebrity or cameras. It was about a man standing between power and a woman who had been made to feel small, and refusing to let it happen again. Leah stepped forward slowly, still holding her breath. For so long she had dreamed of being taken seriously, and now, here was someone standing in front of a crowd, saying out loud what she had never dared to demand for herself. Her voice had always been quiet, but Keanu's voice carried hers forward, amplified it, turned it into something everyone had to hear. Dennis spoke again, softer now. We can revisit the documents, maybe take another look." Keanu didn't move. "You shouldn't be revisiting anything. You should have done it right the first time. Amanda nodded slowly, eyes wet. You're right. Leah looked at her. Not with hatred, not even anger, but with disappointment. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Keanu placed the binder gently back into Leah's hands. Would you like to try again? He asked her quietly. Leah looked up at him, her lips trembling. Yes, I would. Amanda motioned slowly for her to step back to the counter. This time her posture changed. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm ready to help you now. Properly. Leah placed the folder on the counter again, this time with her hands steady. As Amanda began entering the information into the system, Keanu stayed by her side, silent, present. Around the lobby, a woman in the back stepped forward. She spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. It's about time someone said something. This isn't the first time I've seen them do this. A man beside her added, My brother's autistic. Same thing happened to him at another branch. Dennis turned toward the voices. The crowd was no longer watching in shock. They were awakening. They weren't just witnesses now. They were participants. Amanda kept typing. Keanu looked toward Dennis. You see what's happening? Dennis nodded, face flushed. Yes, I see it now. Keanu crossed his arms. Then let it change something. Amanda finally finished entering the last form. She looked at Leah, her voice quiet. Your account is ready to activate. Would you like to make your first deposit? Leah didn't speak right away. She pulled out the envelope from her tote bag. The one she had packed so carefully that morning. She handed it over. Amanda took it, processed it, and handed her a receipt. It's done, Amanda said. Your account is open. Leah took the receipt with both hands. Her fingers touched the paper like it was something sacred. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she whispered to herself, I did it. And this time, there was no question mark at the end. Just as Amanda handed Leah the receipt and mumbled a subdued congratulations, Dennis finally stepped forward again. His face was taut, his shoulders stiff, and the weight of what had just played out in front of the entire lobby pressed heavily on his every word. Mr. Reeves, he said, trying to keep his tone level, please understand, we were simply following protocol. Nothing more. Keanu turned slowly to face him. Which protocol, he asked quietly, denies someone's service based on how they look or speak? Dennis hesitated, caught off guard. That's not what we did. Keanu didn't blink. Isn't it? He gestured toward Leah, who now stood silently at the counter, still clutching her new account folder, her eyes wide and tired but steady. She walked in here prepared, Keanu continued. She brought all the required paperwork. She waited in line like everyone else. She asked for help, followed every rule. And what did she get in return? Dismissal, condescension, public embarrassment. Strawberry broached all of it. Amanda's mouth opened slightly, as if to interject, but she didn't. Dennis cleared his throat. We have to be cautious in certain situations. There are legal obligations. We're responsible for making sure customers fully understand the terms, especially those who may face cognitive or developmental challenges. Keanu's jaw tightened. She spent over a year saving that money, he said. She rehearsed her lines. She studied your process. She even wrote a letter. And you're still questioning her comprehension? Amanda finally found her voice. We just wanted to be sure she understood. That's all. We didn't mean to make her feel. Keanu interrupted. Like what? Like she didn't belong? Amanda looked down. He turned to face the lobby, raising his voice just enough for the room to hear. She understands more than most people I know. Because people like her have to understand more. They don't get second chances. They don't get the benefit of the doubt. They're judged before they even speak. Several heads in the room nodded. A woman near the middle of the line murmured, It's true. Another man said, I've seen it happen, all the time. Leah looked down at her hands, not because she was ashamed, but because it was hard to hear what she already knew spoken so loudly. Then she whispered, barely loud enough for the nearby customers to hear, I just Want to be treated like everyone else. Keanu heard her. He turned back toward Amanda and Dennis. This, he said, pointing gently toward Leah, is the entire point. He let the silence settle in. Prejudice hidden behind policy is still prejudice. No one answered. No one moved. Amanda's hands rested flat on the counter, her mouth still open slightly, but she had no words. And Dennis, who had started this day expecting nothing more than another busy morning, suddenly looked like a man who didn't know where to stand. Keanu's eyes didn't leave Dennis. It's easy to hide behind paperwork, to pretend a policy protects you from accountability. But rules are only fair when they're applied the same way to everyone. That didn't happen today. Dennis looked around the lobby. Customers were still watching. Phones were still recording. His staff stood motionless behind their counters. He shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't intend to discriminate," he said again, this time with less certainty. Keanu shook his head. "Intention doesn't matter as much as impact." Leah didn't walk out of here thinking this was a paperwork error. She walked out thinking she wasn't good enough. And that's because of the way she was treated, the tone, the looks, the doubt. Amanda's voice came back, but quieter now. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I really didn't." Leah turned toward her. "I believed you at first," Leah said softly. "But then I saw your face. You weren't listening to me. You didn't even try. You just wanted me to go away." Amanda looked away, her throat tightening. One of the younger tellers nearby wiped a tear from her eye. No one dared speak. Dennis finally said, "This wasn't how we wanted things to go." Keanu stepped forward again. "But it's how things went. And now you have to decide what kind of place this really is. You can pretend this never happened, or you can let it change something." Leah looked around the room, then down at her folder. The edge of the receipt stuck out just enough for her to see her name printed at the top. Her name. Her account. Hers. "I know I don't always get things right," she said quietly. "But I got this right, and it still wasn't enough." She looked up at Dennis. "Do you know how hard it was for me to come here alone?" Dennis didn't answer. "I practiced every day. My grandma helped me. I asked my boss to double-check everything. I didn't come here to make trouble. I came here to do something for myself." The silence returned, deeper than before. Keanu stood beside her and nodded. "And you did. You did exactly what you set out to do." Then he looked back at Dennis. "The question now isn't about her. It's about you." Dennis swallowed hard. "What are you going to do with this moment?" Keanu asked. Behind them, a voice from the crowd added, "Yeah? What are you going to do?" More customers murmured in agreement. Amanda stood frozen, the weight of her choices clear in her posture. And Dennis, for the first time since the morning began, looked genuinely uncertain of his next move. Dennis straightened his tie, searching for words. His usual confidence, the smooth corporate tone he relied on, seemed to have abandoned him. Every set of eyes in the room bore down on him, waiting. He finally spoke, his voice lower than before. "We'll review our procedures," he said. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Keanu's gaze didn't soften. "Reviewing is easy, real change is harder." Leah deserved respect the moment she walked in here, not after a scene in front of 50 people. A man in line muttered, "Exactly." An older woman added, "You don't fix this with a meeting. You fix it by treating people right the first time." Leah's hands tightened on her binder. She looked up, her voice stronger now. "I don't want special treatment. I just want to be treated the same, like everyone else." Keanu gave her a small nod, then turned back to Dennis. "She said it better than any of us could. That's all this is about. Equality." Amanda's lip trembled. She whispered, "I see that now." But Keanu shook his head. "Seeing it now isn't enough. Tomorrow, when another Leah walks through those doors, will you see it then too? Or will you forget as soon as the cameras are gone?" The words cut deeper than any raised voice could have. Amanda wiped at her eyes but didn't answer. Dennis looked around the lobby, clearly aware of the customers recording, the murmurs rising, the judgment pressing closer. "We'll do better," he said finally. Keanu stepped back slightly, his presence still commanding. "Good, because today, this bank showed its real face, and it wasn't pretty." Leah closed her binder and hugged it tightly to her chest. For the first time that morning, she stood taller. Her voice, though soft, carried through the silence. "I'm not going to let anyone make me feel small again." The crowd stirred at her words. Someone clapped once, then stopped, unsure, but the sound lingered like a promise waiting to grow. Keanu looked at her, pride flickering in his eyes. That's the strength they tried to bury. Don't ever lose it. The silence stretched a little longer. No one moved. No one dared to break the moment. And then Keanu spoke one final time, his words deliberate and unshakable. "Prejudice hidden behind policy is still prejudice, and no amount of paperwork will ever change that truth." Amanda lowered her head. Dennis pressed his lips together, defeated. The entire lobby stood suspended in that truth, the weight of it undeniable. The silence of the lobby didn't last long. It cracked open when a man in his 30s, standing near the middle of the line, stepped forward. His face was flushed, his voice tight with contained anger. "Maybe turned my son away last week," he said. "He has autism. He wanted to open an account for his part-time job money. Same thing happened. They told him to come back with me even though he's legally allowed to do it himself. He left feeling worthless." The words hit the room with force. Customers who had been silent began to nod. Others leaned closer, listening intently. An elderly woman with a cane spoke next. "I've been ignored here too. When I ask questions, they don't answer me properly. They talk over me like I can't understand. This isn't new. This is how they operate." Her voice trembled, but it carried. Keanu turned slowly toward Dennis. "Is this your service model? Humiliation disguised as caution?" Dennis's lips parted, but no words came. The crowd wasn't finished. Another woman raised her hand slightly, as if she were in a classroom. "My cousin has Down syndrome. She came to a bank branch, this bank, 3 towns over. Same story. Dismissed, told to bring someone else. She cried the whole way home." Leah's breath caught. Hearing these stories made her knees feel weak, but it also made her chest feel hot with something else. Recognition. She wasn't alone. This wasn't just her fight. Dennis tried to regain ground. "These are isolated incidents, individual employees. We can't hold the whole institution responsible for a few missteps." "No," Keanu said firmly, shaking his head. "If it were isolated, you wouldn't hear this many voices at once. If it were isolated, you wouldn't see patterns. And if it were isolated, Leah wouldn't be standing here right now with proof that it keeps happening." A low murmur spread through the lobby, agreement rising like a tide. Keanu's voice deepened. "This isn't a mistake. It's a culture. One that tells people they aren't capable enough, smart enough, or valuable enough to deserve the same service everyone else gets." Leah looked at him, then looked at the faces in the room. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was drowning in stares. For the first time, she saw allies. Her hands still trembled, but she stepped forward until she stood beside Keanu. She lifted her binder against her chest like a shield and spoke with a voice that quivered but carried. "I'm not afraid anymore." The lobby went silent again, but it was no longer the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of something breaking open. Leah's words seemed to ripple outward, touching everyone who heard them. A woman near the back wiped at her eyes. A man folded his arms tightly, his jaw clenched, as though he were replaying his own memory of unfair treatment. Another voice rose, shaky but determined. "I'm a veteran," said an older man with a weathered face. "I came here 2 months ago to open a small business account. They acted like I was wasting their time. They brushed me off because I didn't look like the type who could succeed. I walked out and never came back." The room stirred again. Dennis tried to raise his hands, a gesture for calm. I understand you've had experiences, but we can't turn this into an attack on the entire bank. Every company has isolated complaints. Keanu's head turned sharply, his tone cutting. Do you hear yourself? Listen to the room. This isn't a single complaint, it's a chorus. You can't dismiss this as isolated when every story lines up the same way. That isn't coincidence, that's a pattern. Customers nodded, their voices layering one over another. My mother gave up trying to open an account here. They might told my brother to come back 3 different times. I thought it was just me. The lobby had become something larger than a bank line. It was now a gathering place of grievances, finally finding air. Keanu stepped closer to Dennis. This isn't about a form. This is about dignity. When people step through your doors, they aren't just carrying documents, they're carrying hope. And every time you dismiss them, you crush something you can't repair with a receipt. Dennis's face tightened. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The evidence wasn't just in words. It was in the room itself, the faces, the phones recording, the weight of truth pressing down on him from every direction. Leah felt the energy shift around her. A half hour ago, she had been small, silenced, cornered by humiliation. Now she stood taller, her shoulders back, her eyes clear. She wasn't invisible anymore. People were seeing her and listening. She turned toward Dennis, her voice steady. You made me feel like I didn't matter, but now I know I'm not the only one. You did this to others too. How many more will walk away thinking they don't belong, just because you don't want to take the time? Her words, soft but pointed, hit harder than shouting ever could. For the first time, Dennis looked like a man, with no reply. The silence stretched, filled only by the steady hum of the bank's lights and the weight of eyes watching, waiting, refusing to let him escape the truth. The silence seemed to last forever. The weight of it pressed down on Dennis until his shoulders slumped, until the false confidence he had worn all morning slipped away. He glanced at Amanda, but she had no words left. Her face was pale, her hands trembling on the counter. Keanu's voice filled the quiet again, calm but carrying the weight of something undeniable. If this is a pattern, then we're not talking about one mistake. We're talking about a culture. And cultures don't change because you write a memo. They change because people demand something better. Right now, this entire room is demanding better. A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. This time not whispered but open, strong. People weren't afraid to speak anymore. They weren't afraid to be heard. A man near the front crossed his arms. You think we didn't notice? You treat customers different based on who they are. If someone walks in with a suit, you bend over backwards. If they walk in nervous or different, you dismiss them. We've all seen it. Another customer chimed in. It's like you measure people before you even look at their papers. That's not banking, that's bias. Dennis tried again, his voice quieter now. We don't want anyone to feel this way. We'll look into it, I promise. Keanu's eyes stayed locked on him. Promises don't erase the harm already done. Leah didn't just face a delay, she faced humiliation in front of a room full of strangers. And if I hadn't spoken, she would have walked out carrying that humiliation with her. How many people have left this building carrying the same thing? The words cut through the air like glass. No one dared break them. Leah's hands were still tight on her binder, but she stepped forward once more. The trembling in her voice was gone. It had been replaced with something stronger. Something unshakable. I'm not afraid anymore, she said, her eyes locked on Dennis. Not of you, not of your rules, not of being turned away. I know who I am. I know what I can do, and I deserve the same respect as everyone else here. The words hit harder than anything Keanu could have said. They were not his. They were hers. Born from the very pain she had endured, but reshaped into power. The lobby broke into applause. Not hesitant, not timid. Real applause, loud and sustained, echoing through the high ceilings of the bank. People clapped for her, not for the celebrity standing beside her, but for the young woman who had found her voice. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth with her hand, unable to look at Leah. Dennis closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, his face tight with shame. Keanu placed a hand gently on Leah's shoulder. "You? See? You didn't just open an account today. You opened the truth, and no one here will forget it." Leah nodded, her eyes wet but steady. "I'm not afraid anymore," she repeated, louder this time, her voice carrying across the room like a declaration. The applause rose again, and with it the realization that the tide had shifted. No one in that bank would ever see her the same way again. And Dennis knew, in that moment, that the culture of his branch, the culture he had allowed to grow unchecked, had been exposed under a light too bright to ignore. Keanu's eyes didn't leave Dennis. His voice, calm but sharp, carried across the lobby. "What other unwritten rules do you enforce here?" The words sank into the air like a challenge. Amanda shifted in her chair, her face pale. She looked at Dennis, then back at the crowd. The silence pressed down on her until the truth slipped out. "We're told to prioritize fast service," she admitted, her voice cracked. "Customers like her, they take longer." "That's what we're told." The crowd stirred, a ripple of shock and anger moving through the room. A woman in line gasped. A man shook his head with disgust. Leah's face fell, her hand tightening on the edge of her binder. Keanu leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, more deliberate. "So, you discard them to hit a timer?" Amanda swallowed hard, her lips trembling. We have quotas. We're under pressure to move people through quickly." Ness rushed in, his words stumbling. "That is not an official policy. It's not in writing. It's not how we—" Keanu cut him off. "No, but you practice it like law, don't you?" The question didn't need an answer. The expressions on the staff's faces said enough. A few looked down at their keyboards. One shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks burning red. From the crowd, someone raised their phone higher. "I'm posting this," the young man muttered loudly. "People need to see what happens here." The tension escalated. Murmurs grew louder. The truth had slipped out in full daylight, and there was no way to push it back into the shadows. Leah's voice broke through, fragile but determined. "I followed all the steps. I did everything they said. I belong here." Her binder pressed tight against her chest, her knuckles pale. She looked straight at Dennis. "I belong here." The words hung heavy, almost defiant. Keanu nodded and stepped closer to her. With deliberate care, he took the binder from her hands again and laid it on the desk in front of Amanda. His voice softened, but carried unmistakable resolve. "Then let's finish what she started." Amanda's hands hesitated over the keyboard. Dennis looked like he wanted to stop it, but the weight of the crowd kept him frozen. Every pair of eyes in the lobby bore down on them. Keanu kept his focus steady. "No more excuses, no more delays. She earned the right to be here. Treat her like it." Amanda's shoulders sagged. She reached for the papers, her hands trembling as she pulled them into order. The screen in front of her blinked awake. Leah stepped closer, her heart racing, her breaths shallow but steady. For the first time since she walked into the building, the process began. Not because the bank had decided she was worthy, but because she had refused to give up, and because someone finally demanded her dignity be recognized. The clicking of keys began to echo in the stillness of the lobby, each keystroke a reminder that truth had forced its way through the cracks. The sound of the keyboard filled the room, crisp and deliberate, every keystroke echoing like a verdict. Amanda typed slowly, her eyes downcast, her usual impatience replaced with something closer to shame. The forms that had once been dismissed were now treated with precision. Dennis stood stiffly to the side, his jaw tightening each time the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. He wanted to regain control, but every time he opened his mouth, he felt the weight of Keanu's presence and the dozens of phones pointed in his direction. Keanu kept his gaze steady on Amanda, not with anger now, but with quiet insistence. This is how it should have been from the start. Respect, care, fairness. Amanda nodded faintly, but didn't look up. Leah stood close, her hands clasped together tightly, her eyes locked on the screen. Every small progress Amanda made felt monumental. For her, this wasn't just paperwork. This was the validation of a fight she had been carrying for years, the fight to be taken seriously. One customer whispered, "She's braver than most of us." Another replied, "And smarter. She didn't back down." Amanda printed a document and slid it across the counter toward Leah. Her voice was soft now, no trace of the sharp edge it once held. "Please, review and sign here." Leah's fingers trembled as she picked up the pen. She looked at the paper carefully, scanning the lines just as she had practiced. Then she signed, steady and deliberate. When she finished, she placed the pen down with care and exhaled, her shoulders lowering slightly. Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his voice quiet enough for her but still audible to those closest. "See, you were ready all along." Leah's lips curved into a faint smile, small but unshakable. Amanda gathered the signed documents, entered the final information, and tapped the keys one last time. The system processed the new account, the progress bar glowing on her monitor before disappearing with a soft chime. "It's official," Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your account is open." Leah's eyes widened. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she let out a shaky laugh that carried both relief and triumph. She whispered to herself, "I did it!" Keanu turned back toward the crowd, his tone firm once again. "This is what fairness looks like. It's not complicated, it's not time-consuming, it's just treating someone with the dignity they already deserved." The crowd responded with nods, murmurs of agreement, and the steady glow of recording phones. The truth had already escaped these walls, and Dennis knew it. Leah held her receipt in her hands, staring at her name printed clearly across the top. For the first time that day, her body relaxed. She stood taller. She looked like someone who had reclaimed a piece of herself. Keanu gestured to the binder on the counter. She did everything right. The only thing wrong here was how she was treated. And that can't happen again. Dennis's lips tightened, but he said nothing. The customers didn't need more words. They had seen everything. And now, so would the world. Amanda's fingers trembled on the keyboard as she processed the last of Leah's documents. The sound of each keystroke was careful, almost hesitant, like she was afraid of making another mistake. Her posture had collapsed inward, her confidence gone. For the first time that morning, she looked not like the teller in control, but like someone who had just seen the mirror held up to her own actions. When the system confirmed the account, she slid the receipt across the counter without looking up. Her voice was barely audible. "It's finished. Your account is open." Leah reached for the paper, her hands shaking. She held it for a long moment, her eyes locked on her name printed neatly across the top. Relief washed over her, but so did something else, a heaviness, a reminder of the long road she had taken just to get here. Her throat tightened, but she refused to let herself break down in front of the same people who had doubted her. Dennis finally cleared his throat and stepped forward. His face was flushed, his jaw tense, but he forced a polite tone. "Mr. Reeves, we regret how this situation unfolded. Please accept our apology on behalf of the branch. It was never our intent to..." Keanu cut him off with a sharp glance. His voice carried through the lobby. "Don't apologize to me. I didn't come here today to open an account. She did. Apologize to her." Dennis froze, the words landing heavier than he expected. Keanu gestured toward Leah, his hand steady, his eyes unyielding. "She's the one who was dismissed. She's the one who was humiliated. She's the one who deserves your apology, not me." Amanda's lips parted, her face pale, and for the first time her eyes lifted to meet Leah's. The hardness in her demeanor was gone. All that remained was regret. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the second word. "I didn't treat you the way I should have. I didn't listen. And I should have." Leah's grip on her binder tightened. She felt her chest rise and fall in uneven breaths. Slowly, she whispered back, "Thank you for listening now." The two women stared at each other for a long moment, one carrying guilt, the other carrying scars that might take years to heal. But in that moment, something small shifted between them, a fragile acknowledgement of harm, and the smallest thread of dignity restored. From the crowd, a man's voice rose, firm and loud. "I'll be switching banks after this. This was disgraceful." Another customer added, "I'm taking my business somewhere else too. If this is how you treat people, you don't deserve our money." Dennis's face paled further. He looked around, realizing the damage was growing. Customers weren't just angry, they were leaving. Then, the sound of clicking heels broke through the tension. The glass doors at the front of the bank swung open, and a tall woman in a navy business suit stepped inside. She carried an air of authority, her hair tied neatly back, her expression sharp and professional. A nameplate clipped to her jacket identified her as Charlotte Hayes, Regional Director. She paused, immediately sensing the tension, her eyes scanning the silent crowd, the phones recording, the rigid posture of her staff, and then her gaze landed on Keanu Reeves, standing at the counter. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Reeves? What on earth is going on here?" Charlotte Hayes stepped further into the lobby, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. Her presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Employees straightened in their chairs, Dennis stiffened, and Amanda lowered her gaze completely. The customers, however, remained unmoved. Their phones were still raised, their expressions still filled with outrage and expectation. Keanu turned to face her, his expression calm but resolute. "Miss Hayes, I think you already sense what happened here. Your staff humiliated a customer, publicly, unfairly, and repeatedly. And if I hadn't stepped in, she would have been sent home without dignity and without the account she deserved." Charlotte's eyes flicked toward Leah. She took in the binder still clutched to her chest, the way Leah's eyes were red but determined, the receipt in her trembling hand. Charlotte's brows furrowed as she pieced together the picture without a full explanation. Dennis stepped forward quickly, his voice desperate. "Charlotte, this is being exaggerated. There was confusion, yes, but we were following policy." Keanu's head snapped toward him. "Policy?" His voice sliced through the room. "Show me the line in your policy that says you can dismiss someone because of how long you think they might take. Show me where it says you can laugh at them, raise your voice at them, or tell them to just leave. Show me." Dennis stammered, his throat tight. It's not written anywhere, but... "Exactly," Keanu said, cutting him off. He turned back to Charlotte. "It isn't written down, but it's practiced like law, and it's destroying people's trust in your institution." Charlotte looked around the lobby. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, the energy of a crowd ready to see whether she would dismiss them or hear them. She folded her arms and faced Dennis. "Is this true? Were these practices being followed here?" Dennis faltered. He looked to Amanda for support, but she wouldn't meet his gaze. Amanda finally spoke, her voice breaking. "We're pushed to be fast. That's the truth. And people like Leah get pushed aside because they take longer. I'm ashamed of it now, but that's how it is." Gasps rose from the crowd. Charlotte's lips tightened, fury flickering in her eyes. One customer muttered loudly, "So they admitted it. They treat us like numbers, not people." Another added, "And we're paying them to do it." Charlotte took a sharp breath. "We will investigate this immediately. This behavior is unacceptable and, I promise, Mr. Reeves, changes will be made." Keanu's gaze hardened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to press his words with weight. "That's not enough." Charlotte blinked. "Excuse me?" Keanu didn't flinch. "An investigation means months of meetings, papers shuffled, polite memos sent. Meanwhile, Leah walks out of here with a wound that no apology will erase. You don't fix humiliation with a committee. You fix it by holding people accountable today, not tomorrow, not after a report, now." The lobby erupted in murmurs again. Customers nodded. Someone clapped once, the sound sharp in the stillness, before others joined in. Leah stood straighter, the receipt still trembling in her hand, but her voice carried above the noise. "He's right. I don't want another investigation. I want to know that next time, when someone like me comes here, they'll be treated fairly." Her words silenced the room once more. Charlotte Hayes, the regional director, looked around the lobby once more. The weight of the silence pressed on her as much as the dozens of phones that were still recording. She knew this moment was not one she could bury in paperwork or smooth over with rehearsed words. She stepped forward, her voice clear. "Effective immediately," she said, her eyes landing on Dennis and Amanda. "Both of you are placed on temporary leave pending a full inquiry. We cannot allow this kind of conduct to continue, not even for another hour." The lobby erupted in murmurs, some gasps, some nods of agreement. Amanda's eyes welled with tears, her hands clutching the edge of the counter for balance. Dennis's face flushed red, his mouth opening to object but closing again when Charlotte's gaze cut back to him like steel. Charlotte turned toward Leah, her tone softening. "Ms. Monroe, I owe you more than an apology. You showed courage today. You stood when others would have walked away. You reminded all of us who we are meant to be serving." Leah's lips trembled. She hugged her binder against her chest, her eyes filling. She whispered, "Thank you." Keanu stepped closer. "Charlotte, words are good. Actions are better. Don't let this stop at one branch. Don't let Leah's courage go unnoticed." Charlotte nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" Keanu looked at Leah, then back at Charlotte. "Use her story. Use her strength. Build training across your entire bank that teaches staff how to treat every customer with dignity, no matter how long it takes. Let this branch be the last one where prejudice hides behind policy." The director's eyes softened as she considered his words. "Inclusive training, mandatory, bank-wide," she said aloud, as if sealing the thought into action. Then she turned to Leah. "And I want you to help us shape it. I want you to be part of the advisory group that teaches us how to do better." Leah blinked in shock. "Me?" Charlotte smiled faintly. "Yes. Who better to advise us than the person who experienced this, who prepared so thoroughly, who stood her ground even when it was hardest? If you are willing, we would be honored." Leah's knees felt weak, her heart pounding. She looked at Keanu, who gave her a gentle nod of encouragement, his eyes telling her she was ready. Slowly, she whispered, "I'll do it." The crowd broke into applause again, this time louder, stronger, echoing off the high ceilings. People clapped not just for Leah's courage, but for the shift that was happening right before their eyes. Charlotte reached for Leah's hand across the counter. "Your account is open, and now, because of you, we will open our doors wider for everyone else who comes after you." Leah's fingers closed around hers, still trembling, but steady enough to hold on. Charlotte smiled warmly. "Thank you for reminding us who we should be serving." Leah could hardly breathe as the applause continued. It wasn't for Keanu, not for the director, not even for the decision to place Dennis and Amanda on leave. It was for her. For the girl who had walked into the bank that morning with trembling hands and a binder full of documents, who had been told she didn't belong, but who now stood taller than ever before. She glanced down at the receipt in her hand. It was such a small piece of paper, but it carried the weight of 14 months of hard work, of saving every tip and spare dollar, of late nights practicing her words in the mirror. Now, it also carried the weight of a promise, that her struggle would mean something more than just her own account. Charlotte, still holding her hand, spoke again. "Leah, we will be announcing a task force within the week. I want your voice at the center of it. If you accept, you will be helping us create training that ensures no one is ever dismissed the way you were." Leah's chest rose and fell as emotions swelled. She whispered, "I'll do my best." Keanu leaned closer, his voice gentle. "That's all anyone can ask. And your best, Leah, is more than enough." The director released Leah's hand, but not before giving it one last firm squeeze, the kind of handshake reserved not for a customer, but for a partner. She turned to the crowd. "What you've witnessed today will not be brushed aside. This is not an investigation that ends in silence. This is the beginning of a change." The customers clapped again, their voices rising in encouragement. Someone shouted, "About time!" Another added, "This is what accountability looks like." Amanda stood silently to the side, her face streaked with tears. Dennis remained rigid, his pride stripped away, the reality of his choices pressing heavier with every cheer that filled the lobby. Neither spoke. Neither could. Leah turned to Keanu, her voice small but certain. "I thought today was going to break me." Keanu smiled softly. "No, Leah. Today made you unbreakable." Her lips curved into a fragile smile, one she had been holding back all day. She looked out at the crowd, the faces that had once been strangers, now feeling like witnesses to her transformation. She had arrived that morning hoping to prove herself to the bank. Instead, she had proved herself to the world. Charlotte motioned to Amanda to step away from the counter. Then she guided Leah forward. "Miss Monroe, would you like to make the first official deposit into your account?" Leah nodded. She opened her tote bag, pulled out the envelope of cash she had saved so carefully, and handed it across the counter. The machine processed it with a quiet hum before spitting out the confirmation slip. Charlotte handed it back to her with a smile. "Your account is active, Leah. And so is your voice." Leah held the slip next to her receipt, her eyes brimming with tears. "I did it," she whispered again, but this time the words rang with pride, not doubt. The crowd cheered once more, the sound reverberating through the building. Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, you did. And you changed more than just your own life today." Leah stood taller, the binder pressed firmly against her side, no longer a shield, but a symbol of victory. The moment Leah left the bank, receipt and binder in hand, she thought her battle had ended, but in truth, it had only just begun. Within hours, the story that unfolded inside that lobby had spread beyond the walls of the branch, carried into millions of homes by the tap of a button. The first video appeared on social media less than 30 minutes after she walked out the door. It showed Keanu standing tall at the counter, his voice cutting through the silence. Prejudice hidden behind policy is still prejudice. The clip ended with Leah whispering, "I just want to be treated like everyone else." The combination of his calm authority and her trembling courage hit a nerve. The video spread like wildfire. By evening, major headlines dominated the digital space. Keanu Reeves defends woman with Down syndrome against banking discrimination. Bank humiliates customer. Keanu intervenes. A fight for dignity. Viral moment shakes financial industry. News programs replayed the clip on every broadcast. Anchors dissected the confrontation, highlighting the moment Leah stood beside Keanu and whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." That line became the rallying cry plastered across social feeds and hashtags. Interview requests poured in. Networks called Keanu's representatives, begging for a statement. But every time, his answer was the same. "This isn't about me, it's about her." Leah, meanwhile, was overwhelmed. Her phone buzzed nonstop. She had never seen so many notifications, so many names she didn't recognize filling her messages. At first, she was afraid to look, worried it might be more of the cruel words she had endured in the past, but when she finally opened them, her breath caught. One message read, "My daughter has Down syndrome. She saw you on the news tonight and said, 'She's like me. Thank you for showing her she belongs.'" Another, "I've spent years trying to fight for my autistic son to be treated with respect. Watching you stand up there gave me hope." And another, "I'm a teacher for children with special needs. Your courage today will echo in every classroom I step into tomorrow." The words kept pouring in, one after another, until Leah's tears blurred her screen. She held her phone against her chest, the same way she had once held her binder. This time, however, it wasn't for protection. It was because of the love and support flooding into her life. She whispered softly, "They see me." Meanwhile, news anchors debated the broader meaning. One show invited advocates for disability rights who argued that Leah's experience was not unusual, that countless people faced the same treatment every day, only without a celebrity to amplify their voice. Another financial analyst admitted, "This could be a turning point for corporate accountability. Banks will have no choice but to respond." Through it all, Keanu remained silent in the public eye. He didn't sit for interviews, didn't post long statements online. When pressed, he only said, "Ask Leah. This is her story." And Leah, though nervous, realized she finally had a voice people wanted to hear. Leah's first formal interview came at the request of a national morning show. She almost declined. The thought of cameras, of lights, and questions made her stomach twist. But when Keanu called her gently and said, "You don't owe anyone anything, but if you speak, it could help more people," she nodded slowly. So, 2 days after the video went viral, she sat in a simple chair, makeup light above her, microphone clipped nervously to her collar. The host smiled gently. "You've captured the world's attention, Leah. How are you feeling?" She looked down at her lap, then up. "I feel seen." Finally, the clip aired that same day and became another viral moment. In it, Leah explained how she had always followed the rules. She showed her neatly organized binder to the camera. She said, "They thought I didn't belong, but I did. I just needed someone to believe in me." Parents across the world sent photos of their children holding signs that read, "We belong too." One school even held a Leah Day, where students gave presentations on inclusion and wrote thank you letters to her. More letters arrived than she could open. Keanu had them delivered to a quiet place where she could read them at her own pace. She took her time with each one. Some were written in shaky handwriting by children with special needs. Others came from adults who had long since given up on being heard, until Leah reminded them that silence wasn't the only option. One envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single line written in pencil. "You made my mom cry happy tears. That never happens." Another letter read, "My brother was denied a loan last year. No one listened. But when we saw you stand at that counter, we felt like we finally had a champion." The impact was no longer confined to one lobby. It stretched across towns, cities, even countries. Advocacy groups began referencing Leah's story in their campaigns. Disability rights forums cited her moment with Keanu as a model of allyship. Meanwhile, the bank's parent company issued a public statement acknowledging the failure of their internal policies. "We are reviewing our customer service training from the ground up. What happened to Leah should never happen again." But not everyone accepted the bank's carefully worded apology. Activists pointed out that change must be deeper than language. Keanu remained firm. "This is only the beginning," he said in a private message shared by Leah. "Courage, when shared, becomes culture." Leah printed that quote and taped it to her bedroom wall. Each night before bed, she'd read it again. She no longer felt like an exception or a burden. For the first time, she felt like a bridge. between people who had long been overlooked and a world slowly waking up. In a quiet moment, Leah looked out the window at the city lights and whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." And this time, she knew the world had heard her. The morning after Leah's interview aired, a ripple effect swept through major media outlets. What had begun as a viral video had now become the subject of panel discussions on national networks. Anchors opened segments with headlines like, "Public Services Under Scrutiny After Viral Bank Incident," and "Keanu Reeves Uplifts Woman with Down Syndrome, Sparks Global Dialogue." But soon, the focus moved beyond the celebrity involvement. Reporters began asking harder questions. Why was Leah turned away in the first place? What systems were in place or missing that allowed discrimination to masquerade as policy? Advocacy groups were invited onto news programs to explain the daily realities of people with cognitive disabilities navigating everyday systems. One mother tearfully described how her son was denied a job interview because the receptionist assumed he wouldn't understand directions. Another man shared how a bank once made him wait 3 hours for an appointment that never came. On social media, hashtags began trending. "Respect Leah" topped charts in multiple countries. "Break the Bias" quickly followed, used by people sharing their own stories of being dismissed, overlooked, or quietly pushed aside. Celebrities joined the chorus. Some posted photos of themselves holding signs with Leah's name. Others shared stories of family members who faced similar hurdles. But the heart of the movement wasn't the famous names. It was the ordinary people who finally felt they had a voice. At a cafe in Ohio, a barista printed "You belong here" on every coffee sleeve. In Seattle, a bookstore hosted a public reading of letters written to Leah. Across the country, people were no longer just watching, they were acting. Banks, seeing the groundswell of attention, began responding. A major chain announced they were launching a top-down review of all disability training protocols. Another bank stated they were partnering with accessibility consultants to ensure frontline staff received specialized education. One spokesperson said bluntly, "We didn't know how many people were falling through the cracks until Leah showed us the gap." Amid this whirlwind, Leah remained steady. She declined interviews she didn't feel comfortable with, but she agreed to attend a local town hall on disability inclusion when invited by her city's mayor. The hall was packed. Folding chairs had to be added at the back to fit the crowd. When Leah stepped up to the microphone, her binder was clutched to her chest. She looked out at the rows of faces and paused for a moment. Then she spoke. "I never wanted to be famous," she began. "I just wanted to open a bank account. But something happened that day that showed me I'm not the only one who's ever been told no without a good reason. I think it's time we start saying yes to each other more often." Applause rose slowly, then swelled. She continued, her voice shaking slightly but her gaze steady. "It doesn't take much to make someone feel small, but it also doesn't take much to make them feel seen. A minute of patience, a little kindness, belief. You shouldn't have to fight for respect. No one should." The mayor stood and applauded. A woman in the front row wiped tears from her eyes. A boy with braces on his legs gave a double thumbs up. And somewhere near the back, quietly and without drawing attention, Keanu watched. He stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes locked on Leah as she spoke truth into a world finally ready to listen. He didn't need to be acknowledged. Watching her take her place on that stage was more than enough. Leah's speech at the town hall was replayed that night on national television. Clips flooded every platform: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, often paired with simple captions like, "Watch this, just watch." In just 24 hours, the clip had more than 10 million views, and by the end of the week, a shift was beginning to take shape across institutions far beyond banking. Here, a large chain of grocery stores announced it would retrain staff on assisting customers with cognitive and developmental disabilities. A national rideshare app pledged to develop new accessibility features based on feedback from neurodivergent users. Schools, often left out of broader conversations, began integrating Leah's speech into their classrooms. One elementary teacher in Minnesota showed the video to her fourth-grade class and asked, "What can we do to make everyone feel welcome?" A boy raised his hand and said, "We can start by not laughing when someone takes a little longer." Letters and videos poured in from around the world. A woman in Brazil thanked Leah for giving her daughter the courage to apply for a job. A teacher in India shared how students made a mural of Leah's quote, "You shouldn't have to fight for respect." Leah's impact had become global. Through it all, Keanu stayed quiet. He turned down every interview request, every podcast invitation, every chance to center himself in the spotlight. He issued a single statement through his publicist. "This story was never mine. It belongs to Leah and to everyone who's ever felt invisible in places that should have welcomed him." But while he avoided attention, he didn't disappear. When Leah was invited to speak at a disability rights conference in Chicago, Keanu was there again, unannounced, sitting near the back in a plain jacket and jeans. When reporters asked why he kept showing up quietly, someone close to him answered, "Because real support doesn't ask for applause." At the Chicago conference, Leah's growth was undeniable. She stepped up to the podium with confidence. She didn't carry her binder anymore. She had memorized her words. And when she spoke, it wasn't just about her story anymore. It was about systems, policies, empathy. "We need to design a world that assumes people are worthy," she said. "Not one where we have to prove it again and again." The crowd gave her a standing ovation. Leah walked off stage with tears in her eyes, not from nerves, but from purpose. Keanu slipped out before the cameras could catch him. But in that moment, as Leah's name echoed in the room and her words became banners of change, it was clear his presence wasn't needed anymore. She had become her own voice. The world had listened, and now it was beginning to speak back. 3 months had passed since Leah's aha moment in the bank went viral, and the world hadn't forgotten. If anything, it had been a turning point, not just for public institutions, but for Leah herself. What started as a painful day of rejection had transformed into the beginning of something powerful, something lasting. Leah had always dreamed of helping people like her. But she used to think that dream had to be small, something quiet, tucked away in corners. Now, that belief had shattered. Her voice had reached millions, and for the first time, people were listening. She was no longer just a customer trying to open an account. She had become a symbol of courage for thousands who had long felt invisible in everyday systems. And she was determined not to waste that moment. With help from a local nonprofit that supported individuals with developmental disabilities, Leah began volunteering as a peer advocate. She visited libraries, schools, and clinics, anywhere people with disabilities gathered, to talk about how to stand up for themselves in moments of injustice. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her strength came from her steadiness, her clarity. She would say things like, "Sometimes people don't see us, but we still matter, and when we speak, we help them see." Each time she spoke, more people showed up. One morning, as she was preparing a new workshop at the community center, a small box arrived at her doorstep. Her name was carefully written on top in neat handwriting. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, dark brown and soft to the touch. Embossed in gold across the front were 3 simple words: "Your voice matters." There was no card, but she knew. She held the notebook close to her chest, smiled gently, and whispered, "Thank you, Keanu." That same day, she wrote the first page of her next big idea. The title she scribbled across the top: "How to Speak Up When You Feel Invisible." It wasn't just a workshop anymore, it was a mission. She filled page after page with thoughts, role-play exercises, and real-life examples of situations people like her faced. Getting talked over at the doctor's office, being ignored in restaurants, dismissed at service counters, But she didn't just write about problems. She offered language, tools, and courage. She designed every page with care. Simple, clear, human. Leah didn't stop at workshops. With encouragement from the nonprofit staff and her new network of supporters, she began collaborating with advocacy groups to create a printed guidebook titled "Speak Softly, Stand Tall." It was designed for people with cognitive or developmental disabilities, focusing on how to handle discrimination, how to ask for help, and how to advocate for yourself in public places. The guide used her own story as a launching point. One of the first pages featured a simple quote beneath a still image from the bank's security footage. "They said no, but I said I deserve better." That image, Leah in her lavender hoodie standing beside Keanu Reeves, had become iconic. But she was more than a symbol now. She was an author, a leader, and a voice of clarity in a noisy world. A few weeks after she launched the guidebook, she was invited to co-host a town hall meeting on accessible banking practices. Representatives from major financial institutions showed up to listen, not just because of Keanu, but because of the wave Leah had helped create. The movement had grown beyond one viral clip. It had become a demand for real, practical change. That evening, after the event ended, Leah sat alone in the green room flipping through her notebook. Her fingers traced the words, "Your voice matters," again and again. She had brought the notebook to every speaking event, every planning meeting, every late-night brainstorming session. It had become a sacred space, not just for ideas, but for remembering who she was before the world began to see her. Keanu never reappeared in public beside her. He didn't need to. He had passed her the baton, and she had carried it farther than either of them had imagined. But every once in a while, she'd receive a small, anonymous package, a book about leadership, or a handwritten note with just one sentence of encouragement. She always knew who it was from. The handwriting was the same every time. Strong, slanted, slightly right, with confidence. One of those notes simply read, "You're not a story someone else told. You're the one writing it now." By spring, Leah's curriculum was being requested by schools, hospitals, and even corporate offices. Major brands reached out to her nonprofit to ask if they could license her material for company-wide inclusion trainings. What struck people most wasn't just the content, it was the tone. Gentle, insightful, and profoundly human. The final section of her workshop always ended with the same words. "You don't need to be loud to be heard. You just need to believe that your voice deserves space." The first time she said it, she was trembling. The 10th time, she stood with steady hands. By the 100th, she was looking into the eyes of others who had never believed they could speak up, and she watched them nod in recognition. The story had come full circle. A woman once dismissed at a service counter had become the author of tools now used to train the very people who had once ignored her. The lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. It was about what happens when the right person is seen by someone with power, and how that one moment can ripple outward into something permanent, something undeniable. And yet, for all the change, Leah remained herself. She still walked to the library every Friday, still ordered the same hot chocolate with whipped cream, still carried her notebook, pages worn and soft from use. Because at the heart of everything, the speeches, the programs, the articles, it wasn't about fame. It was about one truth she had learned and passed on to others. If the world won't make space for you, build your own table, and then invite others to sit beside you. 6 months had passed, and the old bank branch on Rosewood Avenue looked different now. The exterior hadn't changed much. Same beige walls, same faint green awning fluttering over the entrance. But inside, there was a quiet shift in energy. The posters on the walls now featured images of diverse customers, including one with a young woman who had Down syndrome standing proudly beside a teller. The atmosphere was calmer, warmer, not just performative, real. Leah stepped through the doors with a practiced smile and her leather-bound notebook clutched in her hands. She had been invited to speak with the new staff as part of the bank's internal education program. The initiative, sparked by the viral incident months ago, had turned into a real institutional commitment. Her materials had become required training across all branches. But this was the first time she had returned to this particular location, the place where it had all started. Her steps were steady, but there was a quiet tremble beneath them. Familiar sights stirred old emotions. The tiled floor, the service desks, the scent of polished wood and paper. All reminders of that afternoon when she had been made to feel invisible. But today was different. Today, she was there as an invited voice. A young manager named Claire greeted her with a handshake and a warm, genuine smile. She led Leah to the break room, now converted into a cozy meeting space. Inside, a dozen new employees sat in folding chairs, notebooks ready, eyes alert. Some of them recognized her, others didn't. But every one of them listened as Claire introduced her not just as a guest speaker, but as a changemaker. Leah opened her notebook and began. Her voice was gentle but firm, shaped by months of repetition and newfound confidence. When someone walks through the door, you don't know their whole story, she said, but they're trusting you with part of it. She went on to describe the power of small kindnesses, the weight of words, the difference between performing inclusion and actually practicing it. There was no bitterness in her tone, only clarity. She didn't mention Amanda, not directly, but the air in the room seemed to hold the memory of what had happened here. Her presence alone was a reminder. The session ended with questions, thank yous, and a round of quiet applause. Claire walked her to the front desk where Leah paused before stepping outside. That's when she saw her. Amanda. She was standing near one of the side counters, quietly restocking pens and deposit slips. Her hair was shorter now, her clothes more understated. She looked over, hesitant. Not the woman from 6 months ago, the one who had barked instructions with authority and dismissed Leah without a second thought. This Amanda looked smaller, quieter. She didn't approach right away. Instead, she waited until Leah turned, as if asking permission with her eye. Leah gave the faintest nod. Amanda walked over, stopping just short of arm's reach. Her voice, when it came, was soft and careful. "I've been hoping for a chance to see you again," Amanda said. "Not to explain, just to say thank you." Leah tilted her head, confused. "Thank you for what?" Amanda looked down, embarrassed, then back up. "For changing how I see the world." Amanda's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. After the review, they asked if I wanted to stay. I almost didn't. I was ashamed. But they offered me retraining, and I took it seriously. Not because I wanted to keep my job, but because I realized I never saw people like you the way I should have. I thought I was being fair. I thought I was following rules. Her voice faltered. I didn't understand how cold I sounded until I saw that video. I looked at myself and thought, who is that woman? And I knew I had to change. Leah stood still, listening. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She let Amanda speak. "I've been volunteering at a local center," Amanda continued, "working with teens who have different abilities. I thought I was going to help them, but they've helped me. I wish I could go back and undo what happened. I can't. But I want you to know, I'm trying to do better. Every day." Leah took a long breath. Her voice was calm, steady. "I don't need you to be perfect, Amanda. I just need you to keep trying." Amanda blinked, as if caught off guard by the simplicity of the response. Leah extended her hand. Amanda stared at it for a second before taking it gently. "Thank you," Amanda whispered, "for being kinder than I deserved." Leah smiled. "Everyone deserves another chance. That includes you." They parted with no grand farewell, no audience, just two people who had been strangers, now connected by the complicated, fragile bridge of change. Outside, the air was crisp and bright. Autumn leaves danced across the pavement. Keanu was waiting near a bench across the street, wearing his usual worn jacket and jeans. He stood when he saw her, a soft smile forming. Leah crossed the street and walked up to him. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, letting the moment breathe. "You okay?" he asked gently. Leah nodded. "Better than I thought I'd be." "How did it feel, going back in there?" She thought about it for a second. "Strange, but right." They began walking down the sidewalk, past rows of storefronts and quiet cafes. There was something easy about their pace. No rush, no plan. Just two people walking forward. He almost glanced at her, his voice low and sincere. "You didn't just change a bank, Leah. You changed people." She looked at him, unsure. "I mean it," he said. "What you did, it's not just policy, it's personal. You gave people permission to see each other differently. You gave people like Amanda a reason to grow. That's rare." Leah's steps slowed. She turned to him with a modest smile. "I just wanted to be seen, that's all." "You were," Keanu replied, "and now others are too, because of you." They continued walking toward a small cafe tucked into the corner of the block. As they stepped inside, a waitress recognized Leah and waved with excitement. Keanu held the door open for her, then followed behind. The past was still there, the memory of injustice, the sting of humiliation. But today it had been met with grace, with growth, with human connection. And that made all the difference. It started with a single video. A young man named Julian sat on the edge of his twin bed, earbuds in, watching Leah's story for the third time that week. Diagnosed with autism at a young age, Julian had always struggled with eye contact in interviews. His resume, though full of potential, had never made it past the first glance. But watching Leah, standing at a podium, her voice shaking but steady, something shifted in him. She wasn't just advocating for herself, she was speaking for people like him. He replayed her words again. "Dignity isn't something to be earned, it's something you already have." Julian decided to try one more time. He walked into a local bank branch near his home in Des Moines, Iowa. This branch, like dozens across the country, had recently adopted the inclusive training Leah had helped design. The hiring manager, a kind woman named Marla, looked Julian in the eyes, not over him. She didn't rush him when he needed a second to gather his thoughts. She asked questions that let him show what he was good at: numbers, organization, patterns. 3 weeks later, Julian wore his first employee badge. At his orientation, a screen flashed with a familiar face, Leah, smiling. Her story had become part of the bank's new employee onboarding program. Julian sat a little taller in his chair. Miles away, a grandmother named Irene sat in the waiting room of a community health center, clutching a folder full of paperwork she didn't understand. Her knees ached from the long wait and her heart pounded with anxiety. She'd never filed for aid before. She didn't want to be a burden, but she also didn't know how to advocate for herself. Until the television in the lobby began playing a local segment titled Leah's Law, The Fight for Fair Access. Leah's voice cut through the room. "You shouldn't have to fight for respect," she said. The caption reading, "Viral Advocate Speaks Before State Committee." Irene leaned in. Something in that young woman's tone, a quiet mix of hurt and power, gave her courage. When her name was called, she stood up, walked into the intake office, and for the first time in her life, said clearly, "I need help understanding this. Please explain it to me." The social worker paused, smiled gently, and did just that. Later, Irene told her granddaughter, "That young woman, Leah, she reminded me I'm allowed to speak up. I'm not invisible." And somewhere across the ocean, in a parliamentary chamber in New Zealand, a progressive senator stood holding a transcript in hand. "I want to quote a young woman from America," the senator said. Leah Sanders said, "Dignity isn't something to be earned, it's something you already have." That, my colleagues, is the heart of what we're trying to legislate today. In a packed auditorium in Chicago, Leah stood before an audience of nearly 1,000. The crowd was diverse: students, activists, professionals, parents of children with special needs, and even a few politicians seated discreetly in the back rows. It was her largest audience yet, and her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She took a deep breath. "I was told more than once that my voice was too small to matter," Leah began. "But now I know. It's not about how loud your voice is. It's about who hears it." Applause followed, but she lifted a hand gently to quiet the room. "I never planned to be in the spotlight," she continued. "I just wanted to open a bank account, but the way I was treated, like I didn't belong, reminded me how many people feel that way every day. This isn't just about banks, it's about dignity. And dignity," she paused, her voice now strong and clear, "isn't something to be earned. It's something you already have." The crowd erupted, not in thunderous claps, but in a rising wave of affirmation. People stood, some wiped tears, others nodded silently, as if those words had been meant just for them. Backstage, Keanu watched through a side curtain. He had flown in quietly, not to be seen, but to bear witness. Leah didn't know he was there. He didn't need recognition. He only wanted to be present as the woman who once stood alone at a bank desk now stood tall as a national voice. A short film crew captured the moment for a documentary on everyday changemakers. The closing voiceover belonged to Keanu. "Every act of courage becomes someone else's reason to believe," he said, his voice calm and reflective over footage of Leah's speech. "Sometimes the smallest stand becomes the loudest echo." The film was shared in classrooms across the country. Teachers used it to open conversations about advocacy, fairness, and human rights. Children wrote essays about what they'd fight for. A second-grade girl wrote, "Leah is my hero because she stood up, even when people looked down on her." That essay went viral, shared by celebrities and thought leaders alike. And one morning, as Leah boarded a train to a conference, a mother approached her with tears in her eyes and a young boy clinging to her coat. "Helen talks now," the woman whispered. "He saw your video. He said, if she can talk, so can I. He has autism. And yesterday, for the first time, he asked for chocolate milk out loud." Leah knelt, looked the boy in the eyes, and simply said, "I'm proud of you." The ripple had become a wave. The wave had become a movement. And at the heart of it stood Leah, once dismissed, now defining the conversation. She returned home that evening to find a letter on her doorstep. It was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. Inside, a note from Keanu. "Dear Leah, you reminded the world that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and still changes everything. With deep respect, Keanu." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the back pocket of her notebook, the one he'd given her months ago. The words, "Your voice matters," still etched into its leather cover. That night, she began outlining her next keynote. It would be titled, "The Power of Being Heard." There's a quiet that follows change, not the silence of resignation, but the kind that comes after a storm, when the world feels still enough to truly see what's been transformed. Leah sat at her desk, sunlight catching the edge of her nameplate. It read, "Leah Thompson, Accessibility Advocate," a title she never sought, but had earned through courage most people didn't even realize she possessed. Her desk was modest, but what she had built around it wasn't. On the corkboard behind her, letters were pinned from young adults, parents, teachers, and strangers who had watched her story unfold. Some simply said thank you. Others shared painful memories that they'd kept hidden until her voice gave them permission to be seen. In a conference room across the city, a training session was underway at a major bank. On screen, the facilitator read a quote aloud. "You shouldn't have to fight for respect." The room was silent. "That's Leah," the facilitator added. "She taught us that." Back in Leah's office, she was preparing for a new workshop titled, "How to Be Your Own Advocate." The leather-bound notebook Keanu had given her was nearly full, page after page of ideas, notes from town halls, and words she wished someone had told her 5 years earlier. A sticky note was tucked on the inside cover. It read, "Your voice moved the world. Keep going." Keanu's quiet presence had always been just that, quiet. He never stole the spotlight, never spoke over her. He simply stood beside her when it mattered most. And even now, he chose to stay behind the scenes, watching from the crowd, clapping from the back row. He'd told her once, "You don't need a stage to change the world. You just need to speak." That morning, she looked out her window at a group of high school students entering the building. Today's workshop was for them, young adults with various disabilities, all bright-eyed and unsure, some gripping clipboards, others trailing nervously behind parents or aides. Leah took a deep breath. She remembered being them. She remembered not knowing where she belonged in the world, or if she even had a place in it. In the mirror across the room, she caught her own reflection. Hair pulled back, blazer neat, hands slightly trembling but steady enough. She smiled. Then she walked to the front of the room. "Hi everyone," she said, her voice steady. "I'm Leah, and before we start, I want you to know something. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You don't have to be loud to be heard, and you don't have to wait for someone to tell you your worth. You already have it." The students watched her, some nodding, others wide-eyed. One girl in the front row whispered to her neighbor, "She's the one from the video." Leah continued, her voice soft but firm. "We're going to talk about how to speak up when something doesn't feel right, about how to hold your ground when the world tries to move past you." From the hallway, a familiar figure lingered by the door. Keanu leaned gently against the wall, arms folded, listening. He didn't need to go in. He didn't need credit. What he needed was already in motion. Leah was the story now. He whispered quietly to himself, not for her to hear, but because he felt it in his chest. No act of quiet bravery can unravel years of silence. Later that afternoon, the sun was beginning to dip below the skyline when Leah sat beneath the oak tree outside the community center. A few of the students had stayed behind to ask questions, their voices still unsure, but their eyes a little brighter than when they first arrived. One boy, maybe 17, had waited until the very end. He walked with a quiet shuffle, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his hoodie. When he finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "How did you know you deserved better?" Leah looked at him and didn't answer right away. She remembered the panic in her chest that day at the bank, the feeling of being small, the weight of silence pressing against her lungs. And then she remembered something else. The moment she didn't walk away. The moment she stood her ground. "I didn't," she said gently, "not at first. But someone else saw it in me, and eventually, I started to see it too." The boy nodded slowly, then gave her a small, grateful smile before walking away. Leah watched him go, a lump rising in her throat. That moment, his question, her answer, would stay with her forever. Because that's how change begins. Not always in protest, not always with noise. Sometimes, it starts in a quiet conversation under a tree. Inside the center, a screen flickered to life as a televised session of Parliament played. A representative stood, holding a printed excerpt of Leah's speech in one hand. "Respect isn't a privilege, it's a right." These words were spoken by Leah Thompson, a citizen who stood up for her dignity and, in doing so, reminded us of our collective duty. The room applauded. Across the country, others watched and listened. Leah had become more than a local advocate. She had become a symbol. Keanu sat in a small cafe not far from the center, sipping tea while watching the broadcast on a muted screen. He didn't smile out of pride or victory, but from something deeper, a quiet peace. He had stepped in, not to save her, but to stand beside her. And now, she was lighting torches for others to follow their own path. His voice, soft and grounded, returned like a whisper over a montage of Leah's journey. If you've ever been overlooked, this story is yours too. If you've ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, or wait your turn, remember this: every act of courage becomes someone else's reason to believe. The video shifted to a wide shot of Leah standing in front of a new audience, this time at a national conference for accessibility leaders. Her hands no longer trembled when she held the mic. Her voice no longer hesitated. "I used to think I had to earn respect," she told them, "that I had to prove I was worthy of being treated like everyone else. But I don't believe that anymore. Dignity isn't something you win. It's something you already have. And when we start treating people that way, the world changes." Applause followed, not polite, but rising, surging, from those who had lived in silence too long and finally felt spoken for. Leah stepped down from the stage, and in the crowd, she caught sight of a familiar face. Keanu nodded, just once. No words, just understanding. The screen faded to black. A final message appeared as Keanu's voice spoke the last line. "Respect isn't a privilege, it's a right." And then the call to the audience. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up against injustice? Tell us in the comments. And if you believe everyone deserves dignity, like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories.